Can you imagine doing that right now? Which took ages. Hello everybody, this is Yael, and today we will talk about AI in academia. A little disclaimer, I am not going to focus on STEM or fields in academia that specialize in machine learning, AI and so on. I'm rather referring to the use of AI in academia in all other fields. Specifically, my experience is in humanities. So rather how students, researchers, teachers and so on are using AI as a tool in academia. But let's start looking at tech and what we used when I was growing up. So let's look at, for instance, from high school all the way to a PhD. My first year of high school was in 2004, and at that time the only piece of tech that I had was a Nokia 3330, which was my first mobile phone. Then I remember that during classes we used a slide projector, so this kind of projector. We rarely had computers in school other than just during computer lessons, and we had very limited time with computers, using computers. And even at home, it was quite common to just have one family computer if you had one. And so again, in my family, we had a specific time dedicated to that during the week. And also, if you remember, if you're not too young, you will remember that you couldn't use internet and the phone at the same time. And so we had to limit that time. I only had a mobile phone up until my master's degree. So I didn't have a smartphone, and I was very late in the game. So others already had it, even during the BA. But I remember I just had maybe a BlackBerry was the very best phone I had. The point is, I didn't have internet connection on my phone up until my master's degree. And I even got my first notebook, so not even a proper laptop. I got my first notebook probably in my first or second year of university, so it was during my BA. But I remember that I wrote my bachelor's thesis on the family's computer. Can you imagine doing that right now? I bought my first proper laptop probably in 2015 or something. So before that, I only used a notebook, those little ones. I'll show some pictures. And I even got my first smartphone in 2015, 16, 17, those years. So you have to picture how different it was to attend university with different tools. And I remember the hours spent and wasted photocopying all the material that we needed for each course, how expensive it was as well, and how heavy the books were. And the information we could rely on and gather was quite different and limited, of course. And sometimes we just had the library. That was the main tool we had. And so I can tell you about the difference that I noticed over the past couple of years when I eventually started my PhD in a completely different university from both my bachelor's and master's degree, and in a different country. But still, I think the main differences that I noticed were based on these, on the progress that we had over the past 20 years since I started high school. AI hasn't been invented recently at all. And actually, we have been using it not only in academia, but even in our daily lives at home. And specifically, I'm talking about AI before generative AI. So AI tools that we've been using, even not realizing that those were AI, are, for instance, Google Search, Google Classroom, Google Translate, Google Maps. In Maps, for instance, we have AI algorithms that are used for real-time traffic prediction, route optimization, and location-based recommendations. Then we have all smart home devices, starting from cleaning devices, thermostats, refrigerators, virtual assistants. Then we have Netflix or Spotify, in which we get personalized recommendations based on AI algorithms that analyze the viewing history and preferences in Netflix, for instance, and the same for the listening history on Spotify. Then we have a bunch of chatbots. The first one was Eliza, but we can really find chatbots in most websites nowadays. So it could even be a governmental website, a clinic's website. You really can find them everywhere nowadays. But even Adobe Photoshop, which incorporates AI-powered features such as content-aware fill, automated photo editing, and intelligent cropping for image manipulation and enhancement. So we've been using AI for quite a while. Let's talk a little bit about the pros and cons of using AI. And here we start focusing on academia and education, in which we have, for instance, the first pro is personalized learning, because AI algorithms can adapt learning materials and pace to individual students' needs. So based on an individual student who has specific weaknesses and strengths, the AI algorithm can focus on those and tailor a learning program. A second pro can be the efficiency in grading and assessment. So this is more related to the use of AI for teachers, in which you can provide a quicker feedback to students and therefore allow educators to focus more on teaching and mentoring. Because it's true, I notice how time-consuming grading can be. So if there are ways to automatize certain parts of it, that can be beneficial. The third pro is access to resources, because AI tools can provide access to a vast array of educational resources, including online courses, textbooks, and multimedia content, enhancing the learning experience and allowing diverse learning styles too. Related to that, pro number 4 is support for special needs, since AI technologies can assist students with special needs by providing customized learning material, adaptive assessments, and accessibility features. This would ensure inclusive education for all students. So regardless of the disability and disorder you might have, this might really change your learning experience. And the fifth pro is innovative teaching methods. Because it's true that AI can facilitate innovative teaching methods, such as simulations, virtual reality, and augmented reality, that would offer immersive learning experiences, increasing students' engagement and understanding. But of course, there are many cons. Let's just name 5 again. The first one is bias and fairness. I just watched a short video by Professor Casey, which was exactly about this, but I will link several resources down below of people and websites that I recommend because they are specialized in this field.
This new study suggests, among other things, that GPT-4 would be more likely to sentence a defendant to the death penalty if that defendant were speaking African American English. So what they're doing here is bringing to the surface covert stereotypes embodied in these LLMs, and what they found was that they were significant.
So it's true that AI algorithms may inherit biases from their training data, so from us. Because large language models reflect our own biases. And that's why you can get discriminatory results as well when you ask something to AI. So these biases lead to unfair outcomes and perpetuate the existing inequalities in education, such as gender or racial biases, even in grading and assessment. but it's true in so many other ways. So now we're just focusing on academia, but the same goes for, and this is again what Professor Casey was saying, goes for the job application process and all of that, when your name is discriminated. The second con is dependency on technology. Oh, there are so many disaster movies related to this. Over-reliance on AI tools may diminish students' critical thinking and problem-solving skills, as well as their ability to learn independently without the use of AI and technology. Con number 3, privacy concerns, because the use of AI in education raises privacy concerns regarding the collection and usage of data about the students. And this would include personal information and learning analytics, which may be susceptible to breaches and misuse. Con number 4, cost and accessibility. The implementation of AI technologies in education may come with significant costs, which would limit access for schools and institutions that have limited resources, which would increase the disparities in educational opportunities. And con number 5, ethical dilemmas, which is what I talked about a little bit over a year ago, when I gave a class during one of the courses that I co-taught at Helsinki University in the humanities field. So again, I'm not talking about STEM, but nobody had even realized how AI would be pervasive in education. And so I was one of the first ones in my faculty to talk about it openly and talk about ChatGPT and all of that. And the class was specifically about ethics in research. Going back to point 5, the integration of AI in education raises ethical dilemmas regarding transparency, accountability, and the ethical use of AI tools, requiring careful consideration of ethical guidelines and regulations to ensure responsible implementation. How can we face these cons? How can we move forward and keep using AI tools, avoiding these disadvantages? And this was probably the first question that came up when we started discussing ChatGPT in education during that course. And this relates specifically to alternative assessment methods, which can apply both to high school and university. So how can you use AI fairly, and how students can use AI fairly, so without cheating, let's say? It doesn't really make sense to forbid AI. And this was also part of the first guidelines that Helsinki University came up with a few months later after the boom of ChatGPT, in which they basically encouraged university staff and students to use the tools, giving individuals the responsibility of their actions using AI. And so as a teacher, so at the time I was teaching, right? So as a teacher, my thought was, how can I fairly use AI myself and let students use it in their research or in their essays and still be able to fairly grade and assess? For instance, you can use peer teaching. And so in the classroom, you invite students. First, you inform them and you let them prepare for that, but you offer them the opportunity to teach themselves or to teach to one another, so either in the classroom or in small groups. The same goes for presentations, which is probably my favorite way of doing it. In Helsinki University, I noticed they tend to give several types of essays and final exams, so that if you're more comfortable with one tool, you might use that one and so on, which is something that I never saw in Turin University and Trieste University. So if the final exam was supposed to be an oral exam, so we all had those in Italy, the exception was a presentation or a final essay. Usually it was both, so you wouldn't have just a presentation as the final exam for a course in Italy. Whereas in Finland, I noticed, in Helsinki University, I noticed that some teachers would give several options. So they would accommodate the students' needs. The problem now is that, again, if you want to, in a way, fight this kind of unfair assessment based on students possibly cheating using AI to write their essays, then you might still have to consider other ways to grade students and other types of final exams. This is where oral examinations come in handy. So I always thought that oral examinations were part of the past, and that's why we use them in Italy. But these may be one way of assessing students. And finally, portfolios might be an idea to collect each student's work over time. So over the entire course, they would have to build this kind of portfolio, either alone or together, or maybe in small groups. And that would be first a little bit more difficult to fake, because some parts of this portfolio might be done during classes or along with other peers and all of that. But this is a possible tool again. So peer teaching, presentations, oral examinations, and portfolios could be some of the ways of fighting these cons of using AI in academia and education. There are some specific AI tools that I use in academia, and some were used even before generative AI. So, for instance, as a researcher, you have to use or you should be using a reference manager such as Zotero or Mendeley and others. And then you might be using Site or Moodle. So Moodle was a platform that we used as Helsinki University staff and students. And then there are tools such as Google Translate, Grammarly. And I use Grammarly all the time, but even for the small checks, you're not entirely sure of that specific form of the word or the verb or whatever. Grammarly, it's an AI-powered writing assistant. And the same goes for educational apps, which have been used for a while, such as Kahoot, Duolingo, and Khan Academy. Then we have tools that came up over the past 2-3 years, which use generative AI. And here you have ChatPDF, ResearchRabbit, Trinka, Consensus. I'm not sure about when these came out, but I saw them used more and more by colleagues. And of course, we have ChatGPT. Since the rise of generative AI, we really have to ask ourselves, how can we improve the learning experience of students and the teaching experience as well of all kinds of educators? What I noticed when I taught those couple of courses in university is that teachers are required to do so many tasks that sometimes are just unnecessary or that unnecessarily take a long time. And so you're really draining these teachers and educators of their energy and time and resources when part of these tasks could be done and automated by some AI tool. At the same time, you really have to take responsibility of the use of AI that you make. Or which tools do you recommend to your students as well? So since you cannot avoid it again, I think the only way to fight these cons of AI is to talk to students, explain to them what you think, ask their opinion, because those who are students nowadays basically grew up with this kind of technology, or at least computers and smartphones. They might also have a different grasp of this reality and what education means to them.
I was asked as an AI ethics researcher for my hopes and predictions for AI in 2024, and here's what I said. One reason that it can seem like magic that we don't have control over is if we don't understand it. So my hope for 2024 is learning. And I'm not suggesting that we revamp education to put AI at the center of everything, but if you don't know how AI works, you can't understand its limitations and therefore how it's appropriate to use or not. So I want to, as Joseph Weizenbaum said about Eliza in 1966, make the magic crumble away by making it sufficiently understood. When students learning, including about ethics, I want media cutting through the hype, and I want people to be reflecting on their own uses of this technology. And I want tech companies listening to hopefully even more well-informed critique.
It's true that AI can be scary, especially if you don't know what you're talking about or if you don't know the tools that you're using. But at some point we will have to embrace it, just as we embraced Google Maps, most of us at least, or just as I embraced Google Translate as soon as I moved to a foreign country and I couldn't read the labels, so the ingredients on some packaging when I was doing my groceries. I am part of that generation that both learned how to live without technology and with technology, but it's increasingly more difficult to switch back and forth, right? Because we start to forget what we used to do, or we ditched old tools. I no longer have an encyclopedia at home. My mother has it. I wonder, what's your take on AI in education? Do you think it's going to limit the critical thinking skills of students, for instance? Or do you think we really have to build an entirely new system of grading and assessment, of teaching? How should we approach this problem and this progress? I'm curious about your experiences, especially if you're an educator, a teacher, a professor. What's your experience? Because when I talked about this last year in my department, I encountered some obstacles. When a senior professor talked to her colleagues in a department meeting or something about what we discussed in class about ethics, AI, and research, the responses that she got were, "I'm too old for this, I don't care, I'm going to retire soon, I have my permanent position, why would I care?" That might sound shocking, being Helsinki University in Finland, and yet these were the responses that she got. So even her as a senior, these are the responses that she got. So this kind of blindness and not even caring about asking questions. And of course, this doesn't apply to STEM and to, I don't know, machine learning, computer science, and all those fields that are way ahead of us in the humanities. This was a little bit more of a broad and not too detailed video because I wanted to introduce this topic, but let me know if you're more interested in the specific resources that you can use. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.